Silo Season 3, Episode 7 may have just changed the entire story. For the first time, Lucas and Kennedy step outside during the darkness of night and see something they were never supposed to witness. But while the outside world looks strangely beautiful, something far more terrifying is happening around them. Juliet is forced to make a decision that could cost thousands of lives. Camille is getting closer to becoming the very thing she once feared, and Daniel finally sees the construction of the silos with his own eyes. But the biggest mystery may be the radio. Because by the end of this episode, Juliet realizes that communication between the silos could completely change the game. Spoiler warning, this video contains major spoilers for Silo Season 3, Episode 7. Silo Season 3, Episode 7, titled Radio, begins with something we have rarely been allowed to experience in this world: the outside during nighttime. And the way the episode presents this moment is extremely important. Lucas Carl and Patty Kennedy have spent their entire lives inside a silo, surrounded by concrete, artificial lighting, rules, surveillance, and stories about a poisoned world. They have been told what the outside looks like. They have been given an image of what happens when someone steps beyond the walls. But none of that prepares them for actually standing outside and looking up at the sky. Lucas and Kennedy believe they are going to Silo 17 to rescue the children still trapped there. At least, that is what they are told. But Juliet has another reason for sending them outside. She wants them to investigate the source of the poison that can enter the water system and eventually trigger the safeguard protocol. That means this isn't simply a rescue mission. It is a race against time. Juliet knows that if the safeguard happens, the consequences could be catastrophic. But she also knows that doing nothing could allow the vitamin D+ in the water to kill thousands. Lucas appears to be the natural person to lead the mission. He has already spent years questioning information that other people accepted without thinking. He understands the technical side of the silo, and more importantly, he knows that the official version of reality has never told the whole story. Kennedy, however, faces a completely different kind of challenge. He has spent so much time talking about going outside, but wanting to leave the silo and actually standing outside are two very different things. Then, the moment happens. They step outside, and instead of immediately seeing the nightmare they expected, they see the night sky. The stars are everywhere. For a brief moment, there is no rebellion, no algorithm, no safeguard, no poison, and no political struggle. There are simply two people looking at something they have never seen before. Kennedy's reaction says everything. The outside isn't what he expected. The world is not simply a blank, dead wasteland. There is something above them that the silo could never reproduce. But the beauty doesn't last. Because surrounding Silo 17 are the bodies of people who already tried to escape. The contrast is brutal. Above them is an enormous sky filled with stars. Below them are the remains of people who believed the outside was their way to freedom. The episode deliberately places beauty and death in the same frame, reminding us that the truth of the world is far more complicated than the stories people inside the silos have been taught. And then the radio becomes important. Lucas and Kennedy begin moving towards Silo 17, and suddenly there is a buzzing sound. Then gunshots are heard through the radio. Inside, Juliet and the others believe the two men have been killed. From their perspective, the mission has failed. But the audience eventually learns something completely different. Lucas and Kennedy actually survive. They make it into Silo 17, and the children there are safe. That changes the meaning of the entire sequence, because the algorithm had apparently indicated that they would be neutralized. Yet they weren't. And that creates one of the biggest questions coming out of this episode. Does the algorithm actually know everything? Maybe it does. Maybe it was manipulating Camille. Or maybe the algorithm's definition of neutralized is very different from what the characters assumed. Whatever the answer is, Juliet's situation becomes even more complicated because her plan isn't simply about survival anymore. She has to make a decision involving thousands of people. And this is where the episode becomes almost a moral nightmare. Juliet has three terrible choices. If she does nothing, the vitamin D+ could eventually kill around 2,000 people. If she follows Donnie's plan and destroys the pipe, roughly 1,000 people could die. And if the safeguard protocol activates, the death toll could reach around 10,000. There is no perfect solution. There is no heroic option where everyone survives. Juliet has to decide which tragedy she is willing to accept. That is why Salvador Quinn's story becomes so important. Decades earlier, he faced a similar decision when he altered the water supply. He understood that saving everyone might not be possible. So he made the horrifying choice to sacrifice some lives to save many more. But the mission diary shows just how devastating the consequences were. The loss of memory didn't simply save people from one danger. It destroyed parts of their lives. People forgot loved ones. People lost their identities. Some were pushed toward complete despair. Now Juliet is standing in almost the exact same position. And she chooses. She chooses the plan that could kill around 1,000 people in order to save thousands more. It is not presented as an easy victory. Juliet understands exactly what she is doing. She knows that innocent people could die because of her decision. But she also believes that allowing an even larger number of people to die would be worse. Then, just as the explosion is about to happen, the radio changes everything. Kennedy manages to contact Juliet. 7 seconds. That is all the time she has. Juliet calls off the explosion, and suddenly the mission changes again. Instead of destroying the pipe and accepting the deaths, they now have a chance to find the source of the poison. And that is when the title of the episode suddenly becomes much more meaningful. Because the radio isn't simply technology. It is the thing connecting people who were supposed to remain separated. And if Juliet can communicate with Silo 17, the walls between these worlds may no longer be as powerful as everyone believed. One of the most important details in Episode 7 is something that could easily be overlooked. The characters are no longer simply discovering that other silos exist. They are beginning to communicate with them. That distinction is enormous. Juliet already knows that Silo 17 exists. She has physically experienced another silo and discovered that the world inside her own silo is not the entire human population. But knowing another silo exists is one thing. Being able to communicate with someone inside that silo is something completely different. The moment Kennedy reaches Juliet through the radio, isolation begins to break down. Think about what the silo system depends on. It depends on separation. People inside one silo don't normally have access to information from another silo. They don't compare histories. They don't compare their rules. They don't ask why one silo has different experiences from another. Their understanding of reality is controlled by what they are allowed to know. But communication destroys that advantage. If two silos can talk, they can compare information. If they can compare information, they can discover contradictions. And if they discover contradictions, the entire system becomes harder to control. That is why the radio could be far more important than it initially appears. There is another fascinating detail involving the algorithm. Camille is told that Lucas and Kennedy have effectively been neutralized, yet they survive. That creates a serious question about how much the algorithm actually knows, and whether Camille is receiving the complete truth. It could be that the algorithm's prediction was simply incomplete. It could be that Lucas and Kennedy surviving doesn't matter to the larger plan. Or, more disturbingly, it could mean that the algorithm deliberately gave Camille information that would influence her behavior. If that is true, Camille isn't controlling the situation as much as she thinks. She may believe she is making independent decisions, but someone or something could be guiding those decisions. And then there is the scene involving Robert Sims and Camille. Robert has changed dramatically. He is no longer the same man who once seemed completely committed to maintaining the silo's brutal system. His concern for his son has become one of the main reasons he is willing to work against the people in power. Camille, meanwhile, is moving in the opposite direction. She believes she is protecting people, but every decision she makes pushes her closer to becoming someone capable of destroying lives to maintain control. That is the tragedy of Camille. She isn't necessarily acting because she wants people to suffer. She believes she is preventing something worse. But the more pressure she feels, the more extreme her actions become. Her threat against Amy is therefore much more than a threat against one person. It shows how far Camille is willing to go. And Robert understands it. His statement about their son needing at least one parent who hasn't killed someone reveals the emotional heart of this storyline. Robert knows exactly what kind of monster he has been. He has participated in terrible things. But now, he sees Camille becoming consumed by the same system. and that creates a dangerous possibility. The person who may eventually save Robert could also be the person who destroys him. The biggest theory coming out of episode 7 is that the radio may be the beginning of something much larger than communication between Juliet and Silo 17. It is possible that the silos were never completely isolated from one another. Maybe communication existed from the beginning, but ordinary people were never allowed to access it. Think about how much information has been controlled throughout the series. Books have disappeared. Historical knowledge has been restricted. Technology has been regulated. People are taught specific versions of the past. The entire system is built around controlling what people know. So, what happens when someone discovers a way around that control? The answer could be chaos. Imagine Juliet speaking with someone from another silo and discovering that their history is completely different. Maybe they were told that a rebellion happened for a different reason. Maybe their leaders told them a different version of the outside world. Maybe they have information about the safeguard that Silo 18 never had. Suddenly, Juliet could compare two versions of reality. And that might reveal the biggest secret of all. Who actually controls the silos? We still don't have a complete answer. The algorithm appears to influence decisions. There are people involved in maintaining the system. There are rules that have existed for generations. And the existence of multiple silos means someone had to design a structure capable of keeping these populations separated. But it is possible that the algorithm itself isn't the true master. Maybe it is simply a tool. Maybe the real authority exists somewhere else. And this is where Daniel's storyline becomes extremely interesting. We see Daniel traveling toward Georgia and eventually looking down at the construction of the silos. The moment is powerful because the audience has spent seasons wondering how this world was created. Now we're finally watching part of that history unfold. Daniel also learns about the memory suppression technology through Dr. Sankovic. The story of Sankovic's daughter demonstrates how powerful the technology can be. Memories can be suppressed because they are too painful to live with. But now imagine that technology being used by an entire civilization. Imagine people being given the ability to forget specific things. That doesn't just erase trauma, it can erase history. And if memories can be controlled, then the people controlling the silos don't necessarily need to destroy every piece of evidence. They can simply make people forget why the evidence matters. That is potentially one of the darkest ideas in the entire story. Another theory concerns Robert Sims. I think his relationship with Camille could eventually become one of the emotional breaking points of the season. It is possible that Camille ultimately turns against Robert completely. She could send him outside, imprison him indefinitely, or potentially make a decision that she can never take back. But there is another possibility. Robert could become one of the people who helps expose the truth. He knows too much. He has been involved in the system. He understands how information is controlled. And now, he has a personal reason to fight against it. If Robert manages to communicate with Juliet again, he could provide information that she desperately needs. But that would put him directly against Camille. And if Camille discovers that Robert is still helping Juliet, the conflict between husband and wife could become unavoidable. That is why episode 7 feels less like a standalone episode and more like the moment where several separate storylines begin moving toward the same destination. Juliet is fighting to save the people of Silo 18. Lucas and Kennedy are uncovering what exists beyond the walls. Daniel is witnessing the creation of the silos. Camille is struggling with the power she has been given. And Robert is beginning to understand what the system has turned his family into. These stories are no longer moving separately. They are starting to collide. The next stage of the story could become much more dangerous because Juliet now has something she didn't have before. A potential communication link with another silo. And that means her next move could affect far more than Silo 18. The immediate problem is still the poison in the water. Juliet has stopped the explosion, which means thousands of lives could potentially be saved. But the danger hasn't disappeared. They still need to find the source and shut it down. The question is whether they can do it before the vitamin D plus causes irreversible damage. Lucas and Kennedy surviving also changes the situation dramatically. They have reached Silo 17. They have seen the outside at night. They have experienced the reality that existed beyond their old assumptions. And they are now in a position where information can potentially travel between the silos. That could be the beginning of a new alliance. But it could also make Silo 17 a target. If whoever controls the silo system discovers that Juliet and Lucas are communicating with another silo, they may try to stop that communication immediately. And this is where I think the radio could become extremely dangerous. The characters may believe the radio is simply a way to call for help. But what if it is also a way for someone else to find them? That possibility would completely change the meaning of the episode title. A radio transmission doesn't only travel in one direction, someone else can hear it. So Juliet might believe she is opening a door to Silo 17 while unknowingly announcing exactly where she is. That could create an incredible cliffhanger going into the next episode. Imagine Juliet receiving another transmission. At first, she thinks it's Kennedy. She waits. Static. Then a voice. But instead of hearing someone from Silo 17, she hears information that nobody outside Silo 18 should know. Maybe the voice mentions Juliet. Maybe it mentions her past. Maybe it knows exactly what happened in Silo 17. And suddenly Juliet realizes that someone has been listening. Again, this is a prediction, not a confirmed event, but it would fit the direction the story has been building toward. The biggest threat may not be someone physically attacking the silo. It may be someone who understands the entire communication network. Meanwhile, Camille's storyline could become even darker. She has already crossed several emotional lines. She is threatening people, holding Robert prisoner, and following a system that tells her certain outcomes are unavoidable. But eventually, she will have to decide whether she trusts the algorithm more than the people standing in front of her. Robert is trying to reach the compassionate person he remembers. The question is whether that person is still there. And if Camille finally realizes that the algorithm has been manipulating her, she could become one of the most unpredictable characters in the entire story. Then, there is Daniel. His storyline may look disconnected from Juliet's world, but it is actually giving us the history we need to understand everything. We now know that the silos were deliberately constructed. We know powerful people were involved. We know memory suppression technology existed. And we are watching the world before the silos slowly move toward catastrophe. That means the present-day story and the past are moving toward the same mystery. How did humanity decide that the only way to survive was to place thousands of people underground and control almost every part of their lives? And perhaps the most important question is this: was the silo system created to save humanity? Or was saving humanity simply the excuse used to justify controlling it? That could become the question that defines the final episodes. Because Juliet isn't just trying to save people anymore. She is beginning to uncover the system itself. And systems built on secrets usually become most dangerous when someone finally learns how they work. Episode 7 may have looked like another step toward solving the poison crisis. But underneath that story, something much bigger happened. Lucas and Kennedy experienced the outside world in a way that challenged everything they believed. Juliet was forced to choose between terrible outcomes. Camille moved closer to a breaking point with Robert, and Daniel finally witnessed the construction of the silos that created this entire world. But the radio may be the most important piece of all, because once people in different silos can communicate, isolation stops being absolute. And if isolation was one of the main things keeping the system alive, then Juliet may have just discovered the one thing the people in control cannot afford to let spread. So, what do you think? Is the algorithm really telling Camille the truth, or is it manipulating her? And do you think the radio will eventually reveal that the silos have been communicating all along? Let me know your theory in the comments, because the closer we get to the finale, the more it feels like Juliet isn't just uncovering another secret. She is uncovering the reason the entire silo system exists.